The grease in the air at the North Star Diner was a constant, a smell so thick you could almost taste it on your tongue. For Clara May Thompson, a 22-year-old with eyes the color of a faded summer sky and the premature weariness of someone who'd seen too many winters, it was the scent of survival. Waitressing wasn't a career. It was a frantic, smiling ballet performed between empty coffee pots and overflowing ashtrays, all for the crumpled bills that might, just might, keep the lights on in her grandmother's small apartment. Then he walked in. He didn't belong. In a sea of worn denim and polyester work shirts, his suit was a slash of charcoal silk, tailored with a precision that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. The watch on his wrist, a sliver of platinum and sapphire, wasn't just expensive, it was a statement of cosmic indifference to the price of the North Star's all-day Grand Slam breakfast. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who had never in his life been told to hurry. He ordered the pot roast, a 16 nostalses in 9 special, and a glass of ice water. He ate in complete silence, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the grimy window, a landscape of memory only he could see. He nursed his water for an hour, requested the check, and paid with a crisp $100 bill from a wallet that whispered of Florentine leather. Clara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A $100 bill on a $17 tab. This was it. This was the miracle tip, the one waitresses whispered about on smoke breaks. This would cover Grandma Rose's new prescription, the one the insurance company was fighting them on. This would mean not having to choose between bread and bus fare. He left as silently as he arrived. Clara practically flew to the table, her breath catching in her throat, and there it was. Her change, $98, and sitting beside it, 2 meticulously folded $1 bills. $2. The insult was so profound, so dismissive, it felt like a physical blow. A hot, shameful flush crept up her neck. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run out into the parking lot and hurl the 2 pathetic dollars at the tinted window of his departing limousine. But as she snatched the heavy ceramic plate from the table, her fingers brushed against something taped to its underside. It was small, rigid, and cold. Not just a note. It was a key card, and tucked beneath its plastic sheath was a folded piece of paper that would unravel her world and expose a truth more poisonous than any diner grease. The fluorescent lights of the North Star Diner hummed a tired, monotonous tune, a soundtrack for forgotten dreams. It was a Tuesday night in Cleveland, the kind of damp, bone-chilling evening that promised a miserable Wednesday. Clara wiped down the cracked vinyl of a booth seat, the scent of ammonia and stale coffee, a familiar assault on her senses. Each swipe of her rag was a practiced motion, a small act of defiance against the entropy that seemed to cling to every corner of the diner and to her life. Her grandmother, Rose, was the center of her universe, a woman whose mind was slowly being stolen by the cruel thief of dementia. Rose's good days were fleeting moments of lucidity, her bad days a confusing fog of forgotten names and misplaced memories. Clara's nursing school ambitions had been shelved indefinitely, replaced by the immediate, crushing reality of rent, utilities, and the ever-increasing cost of Rose's medication. Every dollar mattered. Every quarter was a victory. Just as she was contemplating the Sisyphean task of refilling the salt shakers, a customer at table 4, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, who ate the meatloaf special every Tuesday, began to cough. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a choked, panicked, wheezing sound. His face, normally ruddy, was turning a terrifying shade of plum. The diner's other patrons froze, a tableau of horrified inaction. Her boss, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, yelled from the kitchen, "Somebody do something." Clara didn't hesitate. The 2 years of nursing school, the instincts honed through endless hours of clinicals, took over. "He's choking!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the panic. She moved behind Mr. Henderson, her mind a blur of textbook diagrams. She wrapped her arms around his bulky torso, made a fist with one hand, and placed it just above his navel. With a sharp, upward thrust, she performed the Heimlich maneuver. Once. Twice. On the third thrust, a sizable piece of meatloaf shot out of his mouth, landing with a wet plop on the checkered floor. Mr. Henderson gasped, sucking in a huge, ragged breath. Colour flooded back into his face. He slumped in his chair, coughing weakly, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and gratitude. You saved my life," he wheezed. Clara patted his back, her own heart pounding. "Just breathe, Mr. Henderson, nice and slow." She knelt, checking his pulse, her touch professional and reassuring. "You're okay." She returned to the counter, ignoring the stunned looks and murmurs of the other customers. Her hands were shaking slightly. It was a stark reminder of the life she'd left behind, the life she was meant to live. A life of healing, not of slinging hash. That's when the bell over the door chimed, and the man in the charcoal suit walked in. He chose the booth in the far corner, the one with the best view of the entire room, his back against the wall. He moved like a predator, his eyes a startlingly pale blue, missing nothing. Clara approached, her notepad in hand, the adrenaline from the choking incident still singing in her veins. "What can I get for you, sir?" "Pot roast," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "And water. No ice." He didn't look at the menu. He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like he was cataloguing her soul. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the faint stain on her apron, the determined set of her jaw. "Coming right up," she said, forcing a professional smile. She served him with quiet efficiency, her movements crisp and economical. She noticed the way he held his fork, the way he scanned the street through the window between bites. He wasn't just eating, he was waiting. Or hiding. The watch she saw up close now was a Patek Philippe. It was worth more than the diner, the building it was in, and the entire city block. A man like that didn't eat pot roast in a place like this by accident. When he was finished, he laid his napkin on the plate and simply said, "Check." Clara processed the payment, her mind doing the hopeful calculus. The bill was 16,989. He'd given her 100. Even a standard 20% tip would be a godsend. A generous one could change her entire month. She brought back the change, placing the neat stack of bills and coins on the table. "Thank you for dining at the North Star, sir. Have a good night." He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something, regret perhaps or sorrow, crossed his face. "You have kind eyes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't let this world harden them." Then he stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out, leaving the $98 and 2 single-dollar bills sitting on the table. Clara stared at the $2. The kindness of his words evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard insult of the tip. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. A power play. A message that for all her hard work, for the life she had just saved in front of him, she was worth less than pocket change to a man like him. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage pricked her eyes. She grabbed the plate, her knuckles white. She was about to storm into the kitchen and smash it against the wall when her thumb slid across the smooth, cool surface of the plastic keycard taped to the bottom. Her anger cooled, replaced by a wave of icy confusion. She looked around. Sal was yelling at the dishwasher. The other patrons were back to their meals. No one was watching. With trembling fingers, she peeled the tape off. It was a standard hotel-style keycard for a place called Elysian Storage. Tucked behind it was a small, folded piece of heavy cream-colored paper. She unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, precise, but looked as if it had been scrawled in a great hurry. The $2 are for the cameras. They need to believe you are insignificant. They are watching me. By now, they are probably watching you. He is poisoning them. The old ones. For profit. Project Nightingale is the proof. Don't trust the authorities. Don't trust the news. Find the Sentinel. He was the only one who ever got close. Ask him about Nightingale. He will know what it means. I am sorry to do this to you, child. This is my only path to atonement. Clara's blood ran cold. He is poisoning them. The old ones. Her mind immediately flashed to Grandma Rose, to her strange and rapid decline, to the new heart medication her doctor had prescribed 3 months ago. The name of the pharmaceutical company was on the bottle in the medicine cabinet. Omnigen. A sudden, piercing siren wailed past the diner. Clara looked out the window and saw an ambulance and 2 police cars screaming down the street, heading downtown. A crawl on the small television above the counter, usually reserved for sports scores, suddenly flashed a red banner. Breaking news. Her stomach plummeted. She already knew what it would say. Billionaire philanthropist Alistair Finch found dead in his penthouse apartment at the Carlisle. Preliminary reports suggest suicide. Alistair Finch. The name clicked. He was the founder and retired CEO of Omnigen Pharmaceuticals, the man who had just sat in her booth, the man who had just left her a $2 tip and a cryptic message of death. And he hadn't committed suicide. She knew that with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. He had been murdered, and he had just made her the sole inheritor of his secret. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was a witness. Clara didn't clock out. She didn't even say goodbye to Sal. She ripped off her apron, stuffed it under the counter, and walked out the back door into the damp, garbage-scented alley. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clench them into fists to stop them. Find the Sentinel. Ask him about Nightingale. A sentinel was a guard, a watcher. It sounded like a code name. A blog? An old handle? She pulled out her cracked smartphone, her fingers slipping on the screen. She typed "The Sentinel" and "Omnigen" into the search bar. The first few results were junk, but then, buried on the 3rd page, was a link to a defunct blog, a relic from a decade ago. The Sentinel's Watch. The byline belonged to a journalist named Ben Carter. The blog was a collection of meticulously researched, deeply cynical articles, most of them accusing major corporations of malfeasance. The last post, dated almost 8 years ago, was a half-finished investigation into Omnigen's clinical trial practices for a new blockbuster drug. The post ended mid-sentence. Clara clicked on his name. A few more searches led her to a recent article in a local free paper, a "Where Are They Now?" piece. Ben Carter, once a rising star investigative reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, had been fired in disgrace. The official story was that he'd fabricated sources in his crusade against Omnigen. He lost his job, his reputation, his career. The article said he now lived in an apartment above a failing bookstore in the Ohio City neighborhood. Don't trust the authorities. Finch's words echoed in her head. If Omnigen could ruin a respected journalist, they could certainly make a waitress disappear. She couldn't go to the police. She couldn't go home. They might already be there, waiting for her, knowing Finch had passed something on. Her grandmother. The thought of Rose, vulnerable and confused, sent a spear of pure terror through her. She had to get to Ben Carter. He was her only hope. She hailed a cab, her mind racing. The keycard was for Elysian storage. The proof, Project Nightingale, must be there. But she couldn't go there alone. If what Finch wrote was true, she was walking into a war she was completely unequipped to fight. The bookstore was called The Last Word, a sadly ironic name for a place that smelled of dust and decay. A dim light burned in a second-floor window. Clara paid the driver with the last of her cash tips and climbed the rickety wooden stairs at the side of the building. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and neglect. She knocked on the door of apartment 2B. For a long moment, there was only silence. She knocked again, harder this time, her knuckles rapping sharply against the peeling paint. "Go away," a voice slurred from inside. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." "Mr. Carter?" Clara called, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Clara Thompson. I need to talk to you about Project Nightingale." The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, charged. She heard the sound of multiple locks being unbolted, a chain rattling. The door creaked open a few inches, and a single bloodshot eye peered out at her. "Who the hell are you?" "Alistair Finch sent me." The door swung open. Ben Carter looked like a man who had been wrestling with his own ghosts and losing badly. He was in his late 40s, with a face that was once handsome, now puffy and lined with disillusionment. A tattered bathrobe hung loosely on his frame, and the apartment behind him was a chaotic landscape of overflowing ashtrays, empty bottles, and stacks of yellowing newspapers that reached the ceiling like monuments to a forgotten truth. "Finch is dead," he rasped, his voice raw with whiskey. "Saw it on the news. Blew his brains out." "He was murdered," Clara said, stepping inside. The stench of booze and self-pity was overwhelming. "He came into the diner where I work tonight. He left me a message. He said you were the only one who got close." Ben let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Got close?" "Kid, I flew into the sun. Omnigen didn't just discredit me. They salted the earth. They planted false evidence, paid off a source to recant, and made it look like I was trying to blackmail them. They destroyed me. That name, Nightingale, that was my name for the file. No one else ever knew it." "How did you?" Clara laid the folded note from Finch on a small, clear space on his cluttered coffee table. Ben picked it up, his hand shaking. He read the elegant, hurried script, his eyes widening with each word. The cynical, drunken mask fell away, replaced by the ghost of the reporter he used to be, sharp, focused, and hungry. "My God," he breathed, sinking into a worn armchair. He knew. The whole time he knew I was right. He looked up at Clara, his eyes boring into hers. "What else did he give you?" Clara pulled the keycard from her pocket. "Elysian storage, Unit 7 Waitress." Ben stood up, a new energy coursing through him. He was still a wreck, but now he was a wreck with a purpose. They covered it up. The trial data for Veridux, their new heart medication. I knew it was dirty. There were anomalies. Deaths in the Phase 3 trial that were written off as unrelated comorbidities. I was trying to get a whistleblower to talk, a lab tech. She vanished a week before my story was supposed to run. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. "Veridux. My grandmother is on Veridux." Ben's face went pale. "When did she start taking it?" "About 3 months ago. Her doctor said it was a miracle drug. But she's been getting worse. More confused, weaker. It's not just a side effect, Clara," Ben said, his voice grim. "It's the mechanism. I suspected it, but I could never prove it. The drug causes microstrokes over time. Tiny, undetectable brain bleeds. It slowly, quietly erases a person. For a patient with pre-existing dementia, it would accelerate the condition exponentially. They're not just letting people die, they're murdering them in slow motion and billing insurance for the privilege. The room began to spin. Clara gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Her grandmother wasn't just sick, she was being poisoned. And Alistair Finch, the man who had profited from it all, had chosen her, a random waitress, to be his confessor and his avenger. "We have to go to that storage unit," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "Hold on," Ben said, already pulling on a pair of jeans and a crumpled shirt. If Finch was being watched, they know he went to your diner. They're not stupid. They'll be looking for anyone he contacted. Your apartment, your family. Clara's phone rang, the cheerful ringtone a jarring intrusion. The caller ID was blocked. A cold dread washed over her. She looked at Ben, her eyes wide with terror. He nodded grimly. She answered, putting the call on speaker. "Clara May?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the kind of voice that could order an execution and then complain that the coffee was cold. "My name is Julian. I'm an associate of the late Mr. Finch. It seems he left something of ours with you. A small misunderstanding, I'm sure." I don't know what you're talking about," Clara stammered. "Oh, I think you do," Julian said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Let's not play games. I'm calling to let you know that your grandmother, Rose, is quite comfortable. We had a lovely chat. She thought I was her late husband, Harold. Very sweet. We wouldn't want her to get agitated, would we?" The threat hung in the air, more potent than any physical violence. Clara's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, the phone still clutched in her hand. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Simple. The keycard and whatever else Finch gave you. There's an old hotel downtown, the Grand Majestic. It's been closed for years. Meet me in the ballroom on the top floor. 1 hour. Come alone. If I see anyone who looks like a cop, or if you're not on time, Rose's medication might get mixed up. Do you understand?" The line went dead. For a moment, the only sound in the apartment was Clara's ragged breathing. Ben knelt beside her, his face a mask of fury. "It's a trap," he said. "You hand over the evidence, and they kill you both. They leave no loose ends." "He has my grandmother," Clara sobbed, tears finally breaking free. "What can I do?" "He has her." Ben placed a hand on her shoulder. The cynical drunk was gone completely, replaced by the sentinel. "We're not going to give them the evidence," he said, his voice hard as steel. "We're going to give them hell. First, we go to that storage unit. Then, we go to the hotel. But we're not going in there to make a trade. We're going in there to take them down." He looked around his chaotic apartment, a wry smile touching his lips. "But first, I'm going to need some better clothes and a camera." Elysian Storage was a sterile, climate-controlled fortress, a mausoleum for the possessions of the wealthy. The silence in the long, white corridors was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Ben, now dressed in a dark jacket and looking more like the reporter he once was, swiped the keycard Finch had left. The lock on Unit 713 clicked open with an electronic chirp. The unit was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, and contained only a single item, a heavy, silver briefcase sitting on a small pedestal. It looked like something out of a spy movie. "He wanted this found," Ben muttered, examining the case. It had a combination lock. "Did he give you any numbers?" Clara shook her head, her mind racing. "Numbers, numbers! What had he said?" "Nothing." But then she remembered the tab, 16,99, and the tip, $2. The total bill was 18,99. It was a long shot, a wild guess. "Try 1899, she said. Ben looked at her, then keyed in Poitin 899. The latches on the briefcase sprang open with a satisfying snick. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were two items: a slim, encrypted hard drive and a thick, leather-bound ledger. Ben opened the ledger. It was filled with Alistair Finch's precise, elegant handwriting. It wasn't just a diary, it was a confession. It detailed the entire conspiracy, the deliberate falsification of the Veridux clinical trial data, the specific chemical compound that caused the microstrokes, the list of FDA officials who had been bribed to fast-track the drug's approval. And on the last page, under the heading "Blood Money," was a list of names: doctors, hospital administrators, and nursing home directors who were receiving massive kickbacks from Omnigen for prescribing Veridux to their elderly patients. "This is it," Ben whispered, his voice filled with a kind of reverent awe. "This is the whole damn thing. Project Nightingale. It wasn't just the drug. It was the entire network of complicity." He connected the hard drive to a small tablet he'd brought. It contained the raw data, the suppressed autopsy reports, the damning internal memos between Finch and his ruthless successor, Marcus Thorne, the man who now ran Omnigen. One memo stood out, written by Thorne himself. "The target demographic has a high attrition rate anyway. This is just managed care. Profitable managed care." Marcus Thorne. Ben spat the name like poison. He was Finch's protégé, a sociopath in a Savile Row suit. Julian is his head of security, his personal cleaner. Clara felt sick. These men were talking about her grandmother, about millions of grandparents, as if they were livestock. "We have 20 minutes, she said, her voice tight. "What's the plan?" "The plan," Ben said, packing the ledger and hard drive into his bag, "is that they're expecting a scared little girl. They're not expecting a sentinel with nothing left to lose. And they're definitely not expecting you." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the steel that had been forged in the fire of her hardship. "They made a mistake threatening your family. They think it makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you dangerous." Ben made a quick stop, using a burner phone to call an old contact, a tech wizard who owed him a favor. "I need you to set up a live stream," Ben said into the phone. "Highest quality possible, mirrored across multiple platforms. I'm going to send you a link from a mobile device. The second it goes live, I need you to blast it to every major news outlet in the country, and I mean everyone." The Grand Majestic Hotel was a skeleton of forgotten opulence. Dust motes danced like ghosts in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the boarded-up windows. The grand ballroom was a cavern of shadows and decay, its crystal chandeliers shrouded in cobwebs, its gilded walls peeling like sunburnt skin. In the center of the vast, decaying room, a single battery-powered lantern cast a pool of harsh, white light. Julian stood beside a gilded chair, his posture relaxed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. In the chair sat Marcus Thorne himself, and standing beside him, her hand held in a grip of iron by a burly security guard, was Grandma Rose. She was wearing her favorite lavender cardigan over her nightgown, her eyes wide, with a bewildered fear that shattered Clara's heart into a million pieces. "Clara, my dear," Marcus Thorne said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He was handsome, silver-haired, the very picture of corporate power. Punctual. "I do admire that." "Let her go," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. She and Ben had stopped at the entrance, just at the edge of the darkness. "All in good time," Thorne said smoothly. "First, the item Mr. Finch so carelessly misplaced, the hard drive and the ledger. Place them on the floor and slide them over." Ben held up the silver briefcase. "The woman first," he said, his voice ringing with an authority he hadn't possessed in years. "Let the old woman and her granddaughter walk out of here, and it's all yours." Thorne chuckled, a sound devoid of all humour. "Mr. Carter, the ghost of journalism passed. I thought we buried you years ago. You're in no position to bargain. You see, I have the only thing of value in this room." He gestured to Rose. "You're wrong," Clara said, stepping forward into the light. Her heart was a frantic drum, but her voice was steady. She remembered what Ben had said. They were expecting a scared girl. She would not give them that satisfaction. "That ledger," she said, her eyes locked on Thorne, "is a record of you and Alistair Finch poisoning an entire generation of senior citizens for profit. It's a record of you murdering a whistleblower and bribing federal officials. You think my grandmother is leverage? That book is your death sentence." Thorne's smile tightened. Brave words. Futile, but brave. "Julian." Julian pulled a silenced pistol from his jacket. "The case, Mr. Carter, or the old woman gets a sedative she won't wake up from." Okay, Ben said, placing the briefcase on the floor. "Just let them go." He started to slide it forward. "Wait," Thorne commanded. "I want to hear her say it. I want you to admit what you did, Marcus. Admit what you did to my father." A new voice cut through the tension. It came from the shadows near the far wall. A man stepped forward. He was tall, gaunt, and his face was a mask of cold fury. It was the lab tech Ben thought had vanished. But that wasn't right. It was a man. Thorne stared, his composure finally cracking. "Daniel, I thought you were taken care of." "My sister was the lab tech, Marcus," the man said, his voice shaking with rage. "Her name was Laura. She was the whistleblower. You didn't just make her vanish. You had her committed to a private psychiatric facility you own, pumped full of drugs until she couldn't remember her own name. I've spent 8 years trying to find her." Thorne's face contorted with rage. This was not going according to his meticulous plan. "Julian, kill him. Kill them all. We'll take the case and go." Julian raised his pistol, aiming at Daniel. "Now, Ben!" Clara screamed. Ben wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding his phone. He thumbed the screen, and the live stream went active. At the same time, he slammed his heel down on a small device on the floor, a high-frequency audio emitter. It let out a piercing, ultrasonic shriek, inaudible to most humans, but agonizing to anyone wearing a high-tech earpiece. Julian and the other guards screamed, dropping their guns to claw at their ears. The sudden, disorienting pain was blinding. In that split second of chaos, Clara moved. She didn't run away. She ran forward. She grabbed a heavy, velvet rope from a rusted stanchion and swung it with all her might, catching the burly guard across the knees. He buckled with a cry of pain. Ben tackled Julian, a desperate, clumsy move, but effective enough to send them both crashing into a stack of dusty tables. The briefcase skittered across the floor, snapping open. The ledger and hard drive spilled out. Thorne, his face a mask of disbelief, scrambled for the ledger. Daniel launched himself at Thorne, a primal scream tearing from his throat. They crashed to the ground, a tangle of expensive suit and vengeful fury. Clara ran to her grandmother. "Rose, it's me! Clara, we have to go!" Rose looked at her, her eyes unfocused. "Harold, is that you, dear? I'm so cold." The remaining guard, recovering from the audio blast, was getting to his feet, pulling a taser. Clara saw him out of the corner of her eye. She pushed her grandmother behind a marble pillar. The guard advanced on her, the taser crackling menacingly. Clara backed away, her eyes darting around for a weapon. She saw nothing but dust and decay. The guard lunged. Clara sidestepped, her nursing school knowledge kicking in. She did the metal of the fire escape groaned under their combined weight, a mournful sound in the sudden, sharp silence. Thorne's hands were a vice on Clara's throat, the world narrowing to a pulsating tunnel of darkness, his face a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. His words, "You've ruined everything," were a venomous hiss, hot against her cheek. Her lungs burned, starved for air. This was it. This was the ignominious end. A waitress, murdered in a back alley, a footnote in a billionaire's spectacular fall from grace. Panic, cold and absolute, gave way to a primal surge. Her body acted before her mind could process the futility. Her hand, fumbling with a desperate life of its own, found the familiar shape in her apron pocket. The box cutter. Not a weapon, but a tool. A part of her old life. The one of endless napkin boxes and cardboard recycling. With the last flicker of consciousness, her thumb found the plastic slide. The click of the blade extending was infinitesimally small in the vastness of the night. But to her, it was a thunderclap. She didn't slash. There was no room, no leverage. She jammed it forward, a desperate upward thrust into the soft flesh of his thigh. It was an ugly, clumsy, intimate act of violence. Thorne screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of shock and agony that had nothing to do with his polished corporate persona. His grip vanished. Clara collapsed onto the grated metal floor, air rushing back into her lungs in a ragged, painful sob. She coughed, tasting blood and bile. Thorne stumbled back, clutching his leg, his face a canvas of disbelief. He looked at the spreading dark stain on his tailored trousers, then at her, the little waitress with the cheap plastic tool, and his eyes filled with a murderous clarity. The hard drive was gone, shattered on the concrete below, but his fury needed a target. He lunged, not with strength, but with the full, clumsy weight of his body. But a figure was already there, clambering up from the landing below. Daniel. His face was a grim spectre in the moonlight. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. He simply slammed his shoulder into Thorne's side as the disgraced CEO charged. The impact wasn't dramatic. There was no cinematic tumble over the railing. Thorne, his balance already compromised by the wound in his leg, simply lost his footing. He crashed hard against the railing. The wind knocked out of him and slid down to the grated floor, a pathetic, gasping heap of expensive wool and bleeding ambition. He curled into a fetal position, whimpering. Daniel stood over him, breathing heavily, not with triumph, but with the shuddering release of 8 years of impotent rage. He looked at Clara, his eyes asking a question she couldn't answer. Behind them, on the fire escape landing, Ben appeared, his face a bloody mess, but his eyes sharp and alive. The distant sirens were a deafening roar now, converging on them from all sides. Clara didn't look at Thorne. She couldn't. She stared at the box cutter, still clutched in her trembling hand, at the single, glistening drop of blood on the tip of the blade. She had stabbed a man. The thought didn't feel heroic. It felt sickening. She let the cutter fall. It clattered through the grate and vanished into the darkness below, a final, quiet severing of the woman she had been just hours before. The blue and red lights washed over them, painting their faces in frantic, strobing colors of chaos and consequence. Justice hadn't arrived like a cleansing fire. It had arrived like a car crash, and they were the dazed survivors, left to survey the wreckage. The hours that followed were a disembodying fever dream. The world became a series of disconnected sensory fragments, the coarse wool of a paramedic's blanket around her shoulders, the acrid smell of an antiseptic wipe on her neck where Thorne's fingers had bruised her, the incessant, blinding flash of cameras from the street below. She was aware of Ben beside her in the back of an ambulance, his hand gently covering hers, a silent, grounding pressure amidst the storm. He had a deep gash on his forehead that a medic was stitching with practiced, impersonal movements. They didn't speak. There were no words for the chasm they had just crossed. At the police precinct, the fluorescent lights were an unforgiving glare, stripping away the shadows and leaving only exhaustion. They put her in a small, beige room that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. A female detective, kind-eyed but relentlessly methodical, asked her questions for what felt like days. She recounted the story again and again, the words feeling more alien each time, as if she were describing a movie she had seen, not a life she had lived. The details, the $2 tip, the keycard, the look in Alistair Finch's eyes, the cold weight of the pistol, the sickening give of flesh against her box cutter, became a litany, a confession. They told her Marcus Thorne and his men were in custody. They told her Daniel's sister, Laura, had been found, alive but heavily sedated, and was being transferred to a secure hospital. They told her Ben's live stream had been seen by an estimated 50 million people before the network servers crashed. They told her she was a hero. The word felt like a lie, a costume that didn't fit. Heroes felt righteous. She just felt hollowed out, a vessel emptied of everything but the lingering tremor in her hands. When they finally let her go, it was nearly dawn. A detective drove her to her grandmother's apartment building, but they couldn't get within a block. The street was a sea of news vans, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metallic sunflowers. Reporters swarmed the entrance, shouting questions at anyone who came or went. Her home, her sanctuary, had become a cage in a zoo. "We have a safe location for you, Miss Thompson," the detective said, her voice laced with pity. "You can't stay here." The safe location was a sterile, anonymous hotel room in a neighboring suburb. It had beige walls, a generic print of a sailboat above the bed, and a view of a parking lot. It was clean, quiet, and felt more like a prison than any room she'd ever been in. For 2 weeks, this room was her world. Ben, his forehead now adorned with a neat line of black stitches, was her only visitor. He brought her food, second-hand clothes, and news from the outside. He told her of the firestorm they had unleashed. Omnigen's stock had been wiped out in a single day of trading. The Department of Justice had launched a massive investigation. Finch's ledger, recovered from the ballroom floor, had become the Rosetta Stone for a generation of corporate malfeasance. It was more than a confession. It was a roadmap of corruption. And Ben, now writing for every major newspaper in the world, was the cartographer. "They're trying to discredit the ledger," he told her one evening, sitting on the edge of the other sterile queen bed. Thorne's lawyers are claiming Finch was senile, paranoid, that he fabricated the entire thing as revenge after being forced out of the company. They're painting him as a madman. "But the hard drive," Clara began. "The hard drive is 1,000,000 pieces of plastic on a Cleveland street," Ben said grimly. "It's gone. The ledger is all we have. It's Finch's word, and yours." He looked at her, his gaze heavy. "They're going to put you on the stand, Clara. At the grand jury hearing, they're going to try and tear you apart. They'll say you were in on it with Finch, that you were his accomplice, his lover. They will say anything to make you seem unreliable." The thought sent a wave of nausea through her. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I was a waitress, Ben. I served him pot roast. How can I—" "You can because you have to," he said, his voice softer now. "You can because you're the only one who can look them in the eye and tell them what happened. You're the truth. The ledger is just paper without you." In those weeks of isolation, The silence was her greatest enemy. At night, she would jolt awake, the phantom sensation of Thorne's fingers on her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. During the day, she would stare at the sailboat print and see only the look in his eyes on the fire escape. The girl who had performed the Heimlich maneuver, who had moved with such clear-headed purpose, felt like a stranger. In her place was a young woman haunted by a single, violent act she had committed to save her own life. She had taken no joy in it, only a profound and soul-crushing sorrow. The day of the grand jury hearing arrived. A team of lawyers, dispatched by a pro bono firm that had taken up her cause, prepped her for hours. But nothing could prepare her for walking into that formal, wood-panelled room, for the feeling of dozens of eyes on her, scrutinizing, judging. Thorne's lead attorney was a shark in a $1,000 suit, and he circled her testimony with predatory skill, picking at inconsistencies, questioning her motives. "So, Miss Thompson," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension, "a man you've never met, one of the wealthiest men in the world, walks into your diner, leaves you a paltry $2 tip, an insult by any measure, and you just happen to find a key card and a cryptic note that conveniently makes you the linchpin in a multi-billion-dollar corporate conspiracy? It sounds rather theatrical, wouldn't you say?" Clara looked not at him, but at the faces of the jurors. Ordinary people. People who worked jobs, paid bills, worried about their parents. "It wasn't theatrical," she said, her voice quiet but clear, echoing slightly in the silent room. "It was terrifying. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who was about to die. His hands were trembling. He said—" She paused, the memory sharp and painful. "He said I had kind eyes, and that I shouldn't let the world harden them. I think he was talking about himself, about what the world, what his world, had done to him." She held their gaze. "I didn't want his secret. I didn't want his key. I wanted the $98 he left on the table so I could afford my grandmother's medicine, the medicine your client was using to poison her." The shark had no response. In that moment, she wasn't a witness or a victim. She was simply a granddaughter, and her truth was more powerful than any legal maneuvering. The grand jury returned indictments against Thorne and 17 other Omnigen executives and FDA officials within 24 hours. A week later, a woman in an impeccably tailored grey suit came to the hotel. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and she carried a heavy leather briefcase that made Clara's stomach clench. She was the executor of Alistair Finch's estate. "I understand this is difficult, Miss Thompson," Evelyn began, her voice calm and measured. But Alistair was very specific in his final directives. "I don't want his money," Clara said immediately. The words were automatic, a visceral rejection of the entire sordid affair. "It's not for you," Evelyn replied gently, which caught Clara off guard. "Not in the way you think. Alistair knew he was a monster. He didn't delude himself about that. But in his last months, after his own diagnosis gave him a timeline, he became obsessed with a single idea: atonement. Not forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve that. Atonement." She opened the briefcase and laid a thick portfolio on the sterile hotel coffee table. He spent his last 6 months liquidating every personal asset he could: stocks, properties, art. He funneled it all, nearly $9 billion, into a newly structured, irrevocable trust. He called it the Nightingale Foundation. Clara stared at the documents, at the familiar, elegant script of Finch's signature on the bottom line. "The Foundation's mandate is brutally simple," Evelyn continued. "Its first priority is to locate and provide full financial restitution and lifetime medical care for every single victim of Viridux. To their families. To pay off their mortgages, their medical debts, everything. To make them whole in the only way money can. Evelyn paused, letting the weight of it settle in the room. Its second mandate is to use the remaining funds to wage war, to fund independent pharmaceutical research, to lobby for ironclad regulatory reform, and to legally dismantle any corporation that prioritizes profit over human life. It is, in his own words, a weapon forged from his own greed to be aimed at the heart of the system he helped build. Clara felt dizzy. The scale of it was incomprehensible. A foundation of that size requires a board of directors, Evelyn said, and Alistair's final, non-negotiable directive was that the first seat on that board, the chair of the Victims' Compensation Committee, be offered to you. Clara flinched as if struck. Me? I have a high school diploma and 2 years of nursing school. I serve coffee. What could I possibly offer? You're missing the point, Clara, Evelyn said, using her first name for the first time. He wasn't looking for a CEO or a financial wizard. The Foundation has plenty of those. He was looking for a conscience. He was looking for someone who understands, in their bones, what was at stake. He saw you save a man's life over a piece of meatloaf and expect nothing in return. And then he left you that $2 tip. Clara looked up, confused. The lawyer said it was a test. Evelyn shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. Alistair wasn't that clever, not at the end. He was a broken, terrified man. He told me about it. The $2 wasn't a test. It was a failure of his own nerve. He had this grand plan to give you a $1,000 tip, to tell you everything. But when he sat there, he saw the cameras. He felt the eyes of Thorne's people on him. He panicked. He did the one thing he thought would make you dismiss him, to make you angry and forget him. To keep you safe. He left a paltry, insulting tip. It was his last act of cowardice. And in his cowardice, he accidentally found the one person who wouldn't just take the insult, the one person who was angry enough and hurt enough to look under the plate. The truth of it settled over Clara, more profound and tragic than any master plan. He hadn't chosen her. He had stumbled upon her, and she had refused to be insignificant. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of the thousands of other Roses in the world, fading away in nursing homes, their families struggling to pay for the very poison that was killing them. The money was tainted, born of suffering. But it could be transformed. It could be medicine. It could be justice. Yes, she whispered, the word feeling heavy as a tombstone in her mouth. Okay, I'll do it. A year can be a lifetime. Clara moved out of the hotel and into a quiet, modest apartment that the Foundation's security team had vetted. It was nicer than any place she had ever lived, but she kept the furnishings sparse, as if she were just a temporary guest. She finished her nursing degree at night, the clinical precision and focus on healing a necessary balm for her fractured soul. By day, she sat in boardrooms, surrounded by lawyers and accountants, the youngest person at the table by 30 years. She wasn't an executive. She was a storyteller. When they debated compensation formulas and investment strategies, she would speak. She would tell them about Mr. Henderson choking on his meatloaf. She would tell them about the smell of her grandmother's lavender cardigan. She would tell them about the weight of a box cutter in a shaking hand. She was the board's memory, their human anchor. And they listened. The Nightingale Foundation became a force of nature. It didn't just compensate victims, it empowered them. It funded the largest class action lawsuit in history, a legal battle that systematically crushed Omnigen until there was nothing left to sell but the sign on its headquarters. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Ben Carter won the Pulitzer Prize for his series, The Nightingale's Ledger. Clara saw her grandmother 3 times a week at the finest neurological center in the country. The damage from the viaducts was permanent, a cruel etching on her mind, but its progression had stopped. Some days, Rose was lost in a fog, mistaking Clara for a kind nurse, but other days the clouds would part. On those days, they would sit by the window, and Rose would hold her hand and tell her stories about dancing with her husband, Harold, under a sky full of stars. On those days, the $9 billion foundation and the weight of the world would melt away, and Clara was just a granddaughter, holding on to a precious, fleeting moment of light. One cool autumn evening, Ben came to her apartment. They ordered takeout and ate sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes she still hadn't fully unpacked. They weren't lovers, not in any conventional sense. They were something quieter, deeper. They were 2 soldiers who had survived the same war, who spoke a silent language of shared trauma and hard-won peace. "It's over," he said, looking out her large window at the glittering expanse of the city. "Thorne lost his final appeal today. It's really, truly over." Clara nodded, tracing the rim of her water glass. "Does it feel like a victory to you?" Ben was quiet for a long time. "It feels complete," he said finally, "like a story that has found its final sentence. But victory? Victory feels like something you celebrate. This feels like something you carry." He looked at her. "How are you carrying it?" She didn't answer right away. She stood up, went to the small wooden box on her mantelpiece, and took something out. She came back and sat down, uncurling her fingers. In her palm lay 2 worn, creased $1 bills. "I used to think these were an insult," she said, her voice a near whisper. "Then I thought they were a test. Then a mistake. Now, I don't know what they are. Maybe they're just a reminder." "Of what?" Ben asked softly. She looked from the $2 in her hand to the sprawling, indifferent city lights outside her window. She thought of the grease in the air at the North Star Diner, a place that now felt like it belonged to another person's life. She thought of the rage, the fear, the impossible choices. She thought of Alistair Finch's kind, haunted eyes. That a life's value isn't a number on a balance sheet, and that sometimes the entire world can pivot on the smallest, most insignificant of things. She closed her hand around the 2 bills, the paper soft and fragile against her skin. "The quiet life was never quiet, Ben. It was just unheard. Now we hear everything, and our watch has just begun."